So I've been getting a lot of negative feedback on some of my videos, and most of this has been ignorant, and I don't use that in the pejorative sense. I just mean these people don't have information about what they're talking about. They just see lifts and reflexively label them as dangerous without realizing that, people train this way for many decades, that there was a rationale behind it, and that lifting has not always been the way that it's practiced today. But the more educated negative comments that I get basically say, well, yes, people may have trained this way at one time, but maybe there's a reason that lifts like this were left in the past. And yes, there is a reason, or a couple reasons, and I'm going to address those. First, from a bodybuilding perspective, when steroids hit the bodybuilding scene in the 60s, people quickly realized that it's possible to use steroids in conjunction with isolation exercises to produce growth in exactly the muscles that you want to develop superhero type physique, like a exaggerated comic book physique. Narrow waist, big shoulders, big lats. You know the look. Isolation exercises were not that great for producing mass in natural bodybuilders. They were used, of course, but natural bodybuilders prior to this had to rely a lot on the big heavy compound exercises as well to produce mass. But when steroids hit the scene, a lot of these exercises which produce total body strength and are going to really work the obliques, the core, the abs, a lot of these exercises are going to result in a bulky midsection. So when you now have the opportunity to build as much muscle as you want in only the areas that you want, acting like a sculptor, as Arnold said, you just literally slapping on some clay and, making your biceps or your lats grow without touching anything else. If that's the look that you're going for, then it makes sense to abandon a lot of these exercises, which are going to produce growth in areas that you're not trying to grow and disrupt the look that you want. And I'm not stigmatizing that. If that's what you want to do, then take steroids, do the appropriate exercises as prescribed by Vince Gironda, and get exactly the body you're looking for. But that's one big reason why a lot of these exercises are no longer practiced. Then from a strength perspective, this is a little bit more speculation on my part, but I think you'll find a lot of backing for it. When steroids hit the scene again in strength, steroids are a lot more effective at actually building muscle tissue than they are at building tendons and ligaments and strengthening your overall architecture. So obviously taking steroids is going to be very conducive to certain lifts that just rely a lot on muscle mass, like, for example, the bench press. You see a lot of huge bodybuilders who don't even necessarily care about strength or care about bench press, never train bench press, or, don't train, to maximize their bench press the way a powerlifter would, rather, who can still easily bench, 400 or 500 pounds, much more easily than a natural guy who specializes in powerlifting and trains a whole lot to get his bench press max up. But then some of these old school lifts, they require a lot more tendon strength as well as coordination, flexibility, and stuff like that. And just taking steroids and building a lot of steroid muscle mass is not necessarily going to be so helpful when you're getting into something like a one-hand deadlift, a bench press, rather, single arm lifts, things of that nature. To a certain degree it will, but you're also going to have to strengthen your tendons for a lot of these exercises. And steroids don't necessarily do that as effectively as they build the muscle. So what you would end up getting is a situation where you're setting yourself up for a lot of injuries. Now, people say that these exercises are, risking injury in general, but I think that naturals can certainly get away with a lot more, with pushing themselves a lot more than steroid users can, because, the whole body is designed to work together. Everything's been strengthened together. No one part has been strengthened beyond the others, creating the others as a point of failure. So you're not going to, you're not going to be creating more stress on your tendons than they can handle when you're doing these lifts that require more tendon strength as a natural. I think probably, now I'm speculating some, but I think probably early on, a lot of guys who were experimenting with drugs started to realize that, some of these unconventional exercises were, producing way more injuries than they were worth. And so a lot of them got dropped in favor of exercises that just allow more muscle mass to, allow more weight to be lifted. And you still see a lot of injuries. I think drug users still are going to have a lot more injuries because they're just, pushing their bodies beyond what they were designed for. But some exercises seem to be safer than that, for that than others. So I think that's definitely a reason why the exercises that we see practiced today are the ones we see practiced today, and a lot of the unilateral lifts have been abandoned. I'll give a great example. I think one-hand deadlift is probably a really good example of this. A good one-hand deadlifter can probably one-hand deadlift over 75% of their two-hand deadlift. So now that we've got drug users that are, getting up 900, 1,000 pounds in the one-hand deadlift, I mean, that's what would happen if you actually tried to hook grip, 75, 80, even 90% of that. I don't know. No one knows. But it could very easily be bad. I mean, it certainly feels like your thumb's going to rip off when you try a really heavy one-hand deadlift naturally, but we've seen, from history, a lot of people have gotten away with pulling really heavy amounts with just one hand. But I mean, now you've got enough muscle that your two-hand deadlift is 1,000 pounds. Could you, pull your thumb out of socket? I don't know. But it certainly seems a lot more likely. So I definitely think that's another reason why we've seen the exercises that are in vogue change. I mean, as you build more muscle, effectively, you're going to, favor the exercises that are more muscle oriented. And as you get at more risk of injury, you're going to steer clear of some of the exercises that rely more on tendon strength. So I do think that's a big contributing factor in why we see the exercises that we do today and why we've abandoned some of the others. But there's no reason, with that being the case, why a natural lifter shouldn't continue to train the way that naturals have always trained. And I think, in fact, that if you train this way and you're natural, it's probably going to be more effective than the training methods that were adopted after the invention of steroids. So I hope that clears up some concerns people have had about injuries. Well, maybe not. I didn't address the injury part that much, but on the natural end. But I think it addresses pretty well my thoughts on why these lifts were abandoned and what contributed to the perception that they're very injurious.